Take a deep breath before you continue reading this, because what is about to be revealed is not something ordinary, and it did not reach you without emotional struggle along the way. It traveled through silence, confusion, and hidden pain that stayed buried for far too long before arriving at this exact moment where what it carries suddenly matters more than ever. Stay completely focused on this, because it touches something that runs far deeper than surface emotions. There is someone connected to your life who has been hiding something inside themselves for much longer than they would ever openly admit, and much longer than you probably understood. They did not suddenly wake up one morning and realize their feelings had disappeared. They did not truly move on the way their actions may have tried to convince you. What actually happened was much quieter and far more complicated than that. They buried their emotions because they did not know what else to do with them. They pushed everything down beneath the surface. They kept it hidden from view. They convinced themselves that silence was the safer option. But buried emotions never truly vanish. They remain underneath everything, becoming heavier with time. They sit in darkness and wait. And eventually, all of that emotional weight rises to the surface at once. That is exactly where this message is coming from now. It is not coming from confidence or emotional peace or complete clarity. It is coming from fear, panic, and the painful realization that too much time may already have slipped through their hands. Something shifted deeply inside them very recently. Maybe they saw something that reminded them of you unexpectedly. Maybe someone casually mentioned your name. Maybe life finally became quiet enough that the truth inside them grew louder than all the distractions they had been using to avoid facing it. Whatever triggered it, it pulled them out of the emotional hiding place they had been living in, and one realization struck them harder than anything else. They could lose you completely. That thought did not arrive gently. It did not appear during a busy afternoon where they could simply brush it aside and continue with their day. It arrived late at night. It came during the moments when their phone felt painfully silent, when being surrounded by other people still somehow felt empty, when the noise of daily life disappeared and the quiet began forcing difficult truths into the open. They no longer had any way to escape what they were feeling. That became the moment when looking away was no longer possible. Nobody else carries what you carry. Nobody else listened the way you listened. Nobody else understood them without making them explain every small detail of themselves repeatedly. Nobody else offered comfort without making them feel emotionally trapped or overwhelmed. And the moment that truth became undeniable inside them, urgency started building rapidly within their chest. But pay close attention, because this matters deeply. That urgency is not made from love alone. It is also built from fear. Fear of losing something that cannot truly be replaced once it disappears. If they could speak to you without pride standing between their heart and their words, without excuses creating walls around their emotions, without ego interrupting everything they truly want to say, they would finally admit something painfully honest. They should have done more much earlier. They believed there would always be more time. They assumed your patience and care would continue waiting for them, no matter how long the silence stretched between you. They failed to understand that silence slowly wounds people over time. They are finally beginning to realize that doing nothing is still a choice. And that choice created a very real distance between you both. They carry guilt for not showing up when their presence mattered most. They carry guilt for remaining quiet when words were desperately needed. They carry guilt for not finding the courage to be truthful when honesty was the only thing that could have protected the connection between you. Back then, Emotional distance felt safer to them. Silence felt easier to control. Avoiding the truth felt like protection. But avoiding things never truly protects anyone. It only delays the pain while allowing it to grow stronger underneath everything else. This person does not struggle because they feel too little. They struggle because they feel far more than they know how to handle properly. Opening themselves honestly to you meant accepting emotional risk. It meant facing the possibility of rejection. It meant risking instability inside themselves. It meant confronting parts of their own emotions they were not prepared to face. Someone once said that until the patterns hidden in darkness are brought fully into the light, they continue controlling your life from the shadows while you simply call it fate. That is exactly what happened here. Instead of following what their heart had been trying to tell them all along, they allowed fear to guide every decision they made. They allowed pride to speak on their behalf. They allowed silence to become louder than the truth itself. And now those decisions have turned into consequences they can no longer ignore or escape. There is another layer to this that weighs heavily on them every single day. They can feel that you are no longer the same person you used to be. Something in your energy has shifted. The way you respond feels different now. Even your silence carries a completely different feeling than before. You may still care about them somewhere deep inside yourself, but you are no longer chasing after answers. You are no longer repeating the same painful conversations, hoping something will finally change. You are no longer standing in that exhausting, uncertain space where nothing feels clear and everything hurts at once. And that transformation unsettles them more deeply than they expected. The reason it affects them so strongly is because they relied on your patience far more than they ever should have. They leaned on your gentleness. They leaned on your softness while keeping their own emotions locked safely behind walls. Somewhere underneath everything, they truly believed you would always remain there, always understanding, always patient, always willing to wait just a little longer for them. They never imagined that one day you would quietly choose yourself instead. But you did, and they can feel that change clearly now. That silent internal shift inside you speaks louder to them than any argument ever could. Keep listening carefully, because this is where the truth becomes even sharper. What they fear losing is not only you as a person. They fear losing the feeling of being fully seen without judgment. They fear losing the emotional safety they never openly admitted they depended on so heavily. They fear losing that rare space where they could be understood without being pushed beyond their emotional limits. Only now are they beginning to understand that not every connection can be repaired once it has been neglected for too long. Not every bond can simply be recreated with someone new. That realization follows them everywhere now. It appears during quiet moments when they can no longer suppress it. It rises whenever they try to move forward, but still feel emotionally disconnected from everything around them. It returns every time they compare someone else to you and immediately feel the difference in ways they cannot fully explain. That is why the urgency inside them continues growing stronger every day. Because deep down they know this connection was never ordinary to begin with. They know what existed between you carried something real, something difficult to replace, something they may never experience again in exactly the same way. And now they are beginning to understand that some people enter your life only once. Some connections do not return after too much neglect, too much silence, and too many missed opportunities. They replay old conversations in their mind more often than you realize. Small moments that once seemed insignificant suddenly carry enormous emotional weight now. Things they should have said, times they should have reached out, moments where honesty could have changed everything between you. Those memories stay with them because regret has a way of making even the smallest missed opportunity feel enormous later. Part of them still struggles with pride. Part of them still fears vulnerability, but another part of them is becoming exhausted from pretending they are unaffected, pretending they do not miss you, pretending your absence has not changed something deeply inside them. The truth keeps finding ways to break through no matter how hard they try to suppress it. And what scares them most is the feeling that you may finally be emotionally letting go. Not angrily, not dramatically, quietly, peacefully, in a way that feels irreversible. They can sense that you are learning how to survive without the reassurance they once believed would always be there. They can feel that your energy is no longer reaching for them in the same desperate way it once did. And that realization creates a kind of panic inside them they are struggling to contain. Because for the first time, they understand what it would truly mean to lose you. Not temporarily, not emotionally distant for a little while. Completely. That thought sits heavily on their chest during the quietest hours of the night. It follows them into ordinary moments unexpectedly. It appears when they are surrounded by distractions, but still somehow thinking about you underneath it all. And the more they try to ignore it, the stronger it becomes. What they feel now is the collision between love, regret, fear, and realization all happening at once. And it is forcing them to confront truths they avoided for far too long. They know they cannot keep hiding forever. They know silence cannot repair what silence helped damage. They know time alone will not fix what honesty should have fixed much earlier. And somewhere deep inside themselves, they are beginning to understand one final truth that changes everything. You were never asking for perfection from them. You were only asking for honesty, effort, presence, and emotional truth. Things they were too afraid to fully give at the time. And now they are left carrying the weight of realizing that the very thing they feared most, vulnerability, may have been the only thing capable of saving this connection before it slipped too far away. It was never truly about controlling you. It was about finally realizing that time is not endless anymore. Deep down, they can feel a door beginning to close little by little. Not through dramatic endings, not through anger, not through harsh final words, but quietly and almost invisibly. And that kind of closing is always the most serious kind. Because when a door softly closes inside someone's heart, it rarely opens in exactly the same way again. What unsettles them the most is knowing this may have been created by their own decisions. Nobody forced them into silence. Nobody forced them to hide their emotions. Nobody forced them to delay the things that needed honesty and courage. Those were choices they made themselves, because fear convinced them they could postpone vulnerability forever and somehow escape the consequences. But life has never worked that way. Feelings that are ignored for too long eventually create a distance that becomes painful to cross. And now they are standing directly in front of that distance, finally realizing how large it has become. There are moments now when they replay old conversations with you repeatedly inside their mind. Tiny details they barely valued before now return with sharp emotional clarity. The way you truly listened. The way you noticed the little things most people overlooked completely. The way your presence brought peace into situations without demanding anything in return. They took those things for granted because they assumed they would always have access to them. Now the thought of losing them completely feels unbearable to carry. What they are feeling now is not some passing discomfort. It is the emotional weight of realization itself. Realization changes people because once someone finally sees the truth clearly, they cannot go back to not seeing it. They now understand how much of themselves they kept hidden away. They understand how deeply fear controlled their actions and behavior. They understand how much their silence slowly damaged the connection between you. And maybe most painful of all, they realize you may no longer be waiting for them the way you once did. That awareness creates panic deep inside them, because they finally understand something important. Real connections are rare. Being deeply understood by another person is rare. Feeling emotionally safe with someone is rare. And they may have risked losing all of that simply because they waited too long to face themselves honestly. Part of them wishes they could travel backward and undo every moment where fear kept them silent. They wish they could replace distance with truth. They wish they could replace avoidance with courage. They wish they had spoken before everything became so complicated. But life does not move backward. It only keeps moving forward. And now they are left wondering whether there is still enough time remaining to repair what has already been damaged. The truth is, they never truly stopped feeling what they felt for you. They simply became overwhelmed by the intensity of those emotions and chose suppression instead of openness. But emotions that are suppressed do not disappear. They continue living quietly beneath the surface, shaping thoughts and decisions in silence until eventually they rise again, demanding attention. That is exactly what is happening now. Everything they tried to bury has returned stronger than before. And while they still may not fully know how to express everything clearly yet, their inner world is becoming impossible for them to ignore any longer. They are beginning to understand that vulnerability was never weakness. Silence was never protection. Distance was never real safety. Those things only created the exact loss they were trying so hard to avoid from the beginning. Now they are left sitting with the reality of what you truly meant to them all along. Not as something temporary, not as someone easily replaceable, but as someone whose presence touched parts of them they cannot easily rediscover anywhere else. And that realization changes everything inside them. Once a person's heart quietly closes, it rarely opens effortlessly again. They want to reach out toward you. They want to discover the right words to explain themselves honestly. They want to offer an apology that feels meaningful instead of defensive or empty. But fear interrupts nearly every attempt they make. Fear asks them whether it may already be too late. Fear whispers that maybe you no longer care the way you once did. Fear tells them that if they finally allow their real self to become visible, rejection may be waiting for them on the other side. And so they hesitate. They pull back again. They write messages and then erase them moments later. They replay conversations inside their mind that never actually happen in reality. They imagine every possible outcome and still remain standing in the exact same emotional place where they started. Meanwhile, the pressure growing inside them keeps becoming heavier without relief. This is not a promise that everything between you will suddenly reach a perfect ending. It is not some comforting fantasy or guarantee that things will magically become easy. It is something much closer to a quiet confession spoken from a distance. They are not pretending the damage has already been healed. They are not acting as if they suddenly discovered every answer they were missing before. What they are finally admitting, even if only privately within themselves, is that treating you as though you would always remain there was deeply unfair. They did not fully recognize your value until they experienced the emptiness left behind where your presence used to exist. And when truth arrives this late, it always carries pain alongside it, because it arrives together with the realization of losing hold of something that genuinely mattered. But what this means for you is far more important than what it means for them. Listen carefully here. This is not encouraging you to remain frozen, waiting for them. It is not asking you to forgive before your heart honestly feels ready. It is not guiding you back toward pain you already fought hard to survive. It is only bringing into the light the truth they failed to communicate through their actions. You mattered to them far more deeply than they ever had the courage to admit openly. Your absence now speaks louder inside their life than your presence ever seemed to when you were still fully there. And what existed between you was real, regardless of how poorly they handled it. The real power now belongs to whatever decision you choose to make next. True power does not rush simply because another person has suddenly become overwhelmed with panic. And this is something many people fail to fully understand. Desperation is not the same thing as readiness. A person can feel desperate and still not be capable of loving someone with the steadiness, care, and emotional maturity that real love actually requires. Right now, this person is sitting face to face with the consequences of who they chose to be when everything truly mattered most. And consequences are honest things. They strip away comforting illusions. They remove excuses people hide behind. They reveal clearly what silence eventually ended up costing. Now they are revisiting old memories, moments they once dismissed as too insignificant to matter. Small fragments of time that seemed ordinary back then suddenly feel priceless now. They remember the warmth in your voice during simple conversations. They remember the comfort of your presence during difficult moments. They remember how naturally you understood parts of them they struggled to explain to anyone else. What hurts them now is realizing that many of those moments were quietly becoming irreplaceable while they were too distracted by fear to notice. At the time, they believed there would always be another opportunity later, another conversation, another chance to explain themselves, another day to finally become emotionally honest. But people often misunderstand something dangerous about life. Later is never guaranteed, and now that reality feels painfully clear to them. There is a loneliness that appears when someone realizes they were loved more deeply than they allowed themselves to believe. Not because the love disappeared instantly, but because they finally understand how carelessly they handled something genuine. That loneliness has begun speaking to them in quiet moments, during the night, during silence, during ordinary parts of the day where your absence suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. They are beginning to understand that your value was never tied to how loudly you demanded attention. Your value existed in your consistency, your sincerity, your emotional presence, the calmness you brought into spaces without needing recognition for it. And those qualities are not easy to replace. People spend years searching for emotional safety without realizing they already found it once before. That is part of what they are confronting now. Not simply the fear of losing you, but the realization that finding another connection built on the same depth may not happen again so easily. And that truth humbles them in ways they never expected. Still, none of this means you are responsible for rescuing them from their own awakening. Their realization belongs to them. Their healing belongs to them. Their courage must also belong to them. You are not required to abandon your peace simply because they finally recognized your worth after experiencing your absence. Sometimes people only learn the value of something once they are forced to sit without it long enough to feel the emptiness honestly. And maybe that is where they are now, sitting quietly with truths they spent a very long time avoiding, understanding too late that genuine love was never something they needed to fear, understanding too late that silence protected nothing, understanding too late that people do not remain available forever simply because we assume they will. Now the only thing left uncertain is what happens next. Because while realization can change a person deeply, change itself still requires courage, action, honesty, and consistency over time. And until those things become real, realization alone changes nothing. For now, they remain caught between fear and truth, between regret and hope, between wanting to reach toward you and fearing what they may discover if they finally do. And somewhere inside them, a quiet voice keeps repeating the same painful realization over and over again. They almost lost someone who truly mattered.